Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined today by two excellent guests. Firstly, by political scientist and Scottish Democrats Abroad representative Kat Carey. Kat, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you this morning?
I'm not bad at all. And on the other side, we have from European Merchants, Anthony Salamone. Anthony, how are you today?
Great, Kenny. How are you?
I'm not bad. So, today we start as we always do with our coronavirus statistics update. So, these numbers are as of 2 p.m. on Saturday, when we had 1,101 new confirmed cases of COVID 19 in Scotland and sadly 24 new reported deaths. A total of 987,489 people in Scotland have now been tested. Of those, 923,576 were confirmed negative. 63,913 were positive. As of, this would have been Friday night, there were 1,149 people in hospital, 80 of whom were in intensive care. And that takes the total of deaths in Scotland now to 2,843. That number covers only people who have died in hospital having had a positive test. Obviously, we will find out today, today's figures as of about 2 p.m. today when the Scottish Government reports them. But our first story today, the big news that came out last night, it was leaked slightly earlier, but officially announced last night, that England is to go into a 4-week lockdown. This obviously comes on the heels of Wales organising a new lockdown for Wales. Northern Ireland introducing strict new restrictions, Scotland also introducing its new tiers, but England is now to go into a full lockdown. So, Kat, I think I'll come to you first on this. What do you think of the way that this announcement came out last night? I don't know, did you catch any of the press conference when it eventually came on air?
I don't watch those press briefings. I stopped watching those months ago. I did see that there was something leaked, and then I saw people saying, this press conference is late, still waiting, still waiting. And then I saw some of the slides that they presented and how poor they were. And I saw I saw a lot of people on Twitter, on social media, talking about what they didn't say, including some sage scientists.
Hmm. So, well, I'll turn to Anthony just in case he saw any of it. Anthony, did you catch any of the press conference? What did you make of it? Anthony? Oh, we appear to have lost Anthony for a minute, or I can't hear him anyway. So, Kat, I'll come back to you. Anthony, can you hear us?
Yes, sorry.
Oh,
Can you
yeah.
just repeat the question quickly?
Sorry, yes. I was just asking regarding the new English lockdown. Did you catch any of the press conference? What did you make of the announcement of this?
Well, it's a very serious situation, of course, to be going back into a near full lockdown, or the new variety of the European full lockdown. It's certainly not the only country in Europe to do that. Ireland's been in that for over a week. France and Germany have headed to varieties of that. So, I mean, it makes sense. It's part of the second wave that we're seeing across Europe. But obviously, I'm concerned that perhaps more action wasn't taken sooner, naturally. I understand that was the scientific advice. And I, of course, appreciate the politicians have to balance different things, but I think it's very clear that the second wave has been coming. That particularly with the test and tracing system in England, that it's not at the level where it should be, and there have been lots of problems with that, which means it's been harder to maintain the lower level restrictions. So I suppose it was inevitable. The question is, should it have been earlier? And I suppose the consensus probably will be that yes, it should have been.
Now, obviously, we did have earlier announcements of changes in Wales. They have their 2-week kind of lockdown that they're talking about, this circuit breaker idea. Same thing in Northern Ireland. And then, obviously, the new tiers in Scotland. But coming on the heels of the significantly increased restrictions in the Central Belt a few weeks ago. What do you think is going on? I mean, is this just Boris Johnson having to copy Mark Drakeford the way we've seen this kind of accusation about different parts of the UK doing things differently? Why do you think England has got to this stage now, and why do you think maybe it hasn't done it sooner, as you suggested they might have done?
Well, we know that from the very beginning of the pandemic, Boris Johnson had originally sought to downplay it, of course, and as did Donald Trump as well. Donald Trump still does. And we know that the UK government, particularly this Conservative government, is very minded to consider the economic consequences, which are important. But I have the strong sense that the Conservative government in London, weighs them more heavily than other governments would do. And undoubtedly, that's part of the reasons why the UK government was, in the first instance, eager to lift the first lockdown, perhaps earlier than it might have been better, and more reluctant to go back into a variety of lockdown now. Now, I mean, it's good that there's, that we have devolution, that the health has devolved in the different parts of the UK, and that Scotland can chart its own course. I think that the leveled system, a leveled tiered system or leveled system, is a good thing. I think it's good. It makes it easier for people to understand where we are, where we could be going. I have been studying the Irish five-level system since it was introduced, and I think that's a very good model. I'm pleased that the Scottish government has adopted a five-level approach as well. I don't understand why it's not level 1 to 5 rather than 0 to 4, but nevertheless. So no, I think that's a good system. But I suppose it points to, and I talk about Brexit almost every time I'm on the show, but it would be good to have a kind of harmonized approach, certainly across the UK, but also within the European Union. I think a five-level system across all of Europe. Of course, every part of Europe, every state and every country, region within it being at a different level, but having a degree of consistency would be extremely helpful on all levels, in terms of people understanding what's going on, in terms of people considering whether or not they can travel somewhere, and so on.
Now, Kat, sorry, I'm going to come back to you now. Obviously, the situation in England has got pretty bad over the last few weeks. We've seen case numbers rising way higher than they were in back in April and May, but we've not seen quite the same level of deaths yet, at least not yet, and God willing, we won't. But I wonder, is this just too little, too late for England? Is this a case of them not doing something because they wanted to protect the economy, and then are ending up having to do more damage to the economy because they didn't do something sooner?
Well, I do know that the Scottish government and their advisors have put um, keeping schools open as a priority, and we opened on time. And I think that going into a full lockdown, maybe they weren't prepared, maybe they didn't have the plan, and it doesn't seem like keeping the schools open were their first priority. And I think that's kind of thrown a spanner in the works as far as how they're going to do things. They have the levers to pull for the finances, but they're doing it. I mean, I guess it doesn't seem like they're worried about the health of the people as much as they are about the health of the economy.
Of course, the two, some of us know that, you don't have much of economy if you don't have people, but I wonder, look, when you look at this in the context of the UK, we've seen a lot of people referring to the UK going into a new lockdown because the UK, obviously, it's the UK government announcing this, but it is just England. Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland, as we've said, all have their own situation. I wonder, do you think that there's a bit of a dilemma now for the devolved leaders, particularly Nicola Sturgeon, given that there is now this full, nationwide lockdown across England, but Scotland is still in these tiers? I mean, if things suddenly get better in England and don't get better as quickly in Scotland, Sturgeon is going to be told, why didn't you go into lockdown like England? But by the same token, if she were to go into lockdown and things were to get worse, or the economy was to struggle more, again, she would be told, why didn't you stick with the 5 tiers? Do you think there is a dilemma there, and how do you think Nicola Sturgeon should approach this?
Well, I think that her approach, or the Scottish government's approach, has been to listen to the health advisors. And I'm not sure that's what Boris Johnson is doing. I'm not sure which advisors he's listening to. And I think that not paying it, not ignoring, but independently formulating the approach and just trying to keep going as you're going and not changing it based on what the UK government is doing for England is probably the best way to keep going, because you can look at what SAGE is advising and they're not advising the same things that we're hearing from Boris Johnson. So I just think that you keep listening to the scientific advisors, listen to Debbie Streetart, listen to the experts and pay attention to what the independent sage group is saying, less so than the cabinet and Boris Johnson.
Anthony, I'll come back to you now. When we when you look at the way things are for Scotland now, do you think there is going to be pressure now on Sturgeon to follow suit to go into some sort of full lockdown? I mean, it does often seem that the opposition politicians here want things to be worse in Scotland just so that they've got a bone to pick with the First Minister.
Well, I think that it's perfectly possible that that kind of pressure could materialize. I think part of that is that a lot of people tune into London-based so-called UK-wide media, which can sometimes make it confusing for the ordinary person trying to find out what the information is for their particular place, in our case, Scotland. But I think having a leveled system makes a big difference. You know, we are at most of us in the central belt were already on level 3 of 4, which is of 5. So that's already quite severe, as it were, and we're only a step away for this part of the country from a full lockdown in any case. So we have a system. We can say that we're following a 5-level system, and we're currently on the level that is best for this part of the country. Obviously, other parts of the country are on a different level based on their circumstances, and I think that's good. I think that should be maintained. If, for instance, if we look at the Highlands and Islands, which throughout the pandemic have had lower rates of the pandemic than other parts of Scotland, it makes sense if that continues to be the case for them to be at a lower level, and have a fewer restrictions attached, not to automatically say that all of the UK or indeed all of Scotland needs to be at a particularly high level just because circumstances aren't so great in one part of Scotland or the UK. So no, I think having the system that we have now makes it easier to say that we are taking a graduated approach based on the circumstances on the ground. And that makes a lot of sense. So I think that that's a good way to try and counter any assertion that the whole of the UK needs to somehow, for some reason, do the same thing.
Well, of course, one of the great criticisms of the UK government over the last several months has been that the furlough scheme was due to end today. In fact, well, it actually was due to end last night. And it was announced yesterday that it will now be extended until the 1st of December. Now, the Welsh government, the Scottish government, the Northern Irish government have all pleaded with the UK government over the last few months, other opposition politicians as well, to extend the furlough scheme, and had been told under no circumstances it's not happening. They weren't even willing to give Greater Manchester, the money that they asked for when they were going into new restrictions. But now that the whole of England needs it, or perhaps especially the south of England needs it, the furlough scheme has been extended to cover the whole of this new lockdown period. Kat, is it a coincidence, do you think, that once London needed something, the magic money tree produced?
Am I surprised by that? No, I'm not. I think that part of their resistance to going into lockdown was the amount of furlough and amount of funding that they were going to have to give out to all 4 nations in the UK. So I think that maybe the people that live in the south of England were suffering, and they were exposed to reinfection rates that were higher for longer because of the government's unwillingness to extend the furlough schemes, and they're wanting to use the monies for something else.
Now, it's not 100% clear how this will apply to the rest of the UK. It is assumed that this will be available to everybody, whether or not the Scotland is in a full lockdown like England's. But of course, as Alison Thulis pointed out yesterday, there are already companies that have had to make redundancies because they didn't know how they were going to pay anybody come November. And now this has been extended. It must be pretty galling for companies that have had to let people go, or people who have been let go, to face this, being told now that there is an extension and that there is going to be some money available.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what your question was.
Sorry, yeah, I'm just saying it must be quite galling if you've been made redundant because the furlough scheme was ending, to then find that at the last minute it's been reintroduced.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anyone right now that's been made redundant. I have a neighbor that's a business owner who's said that, he's got to think about his staff when it comes to whether or not he's going to shut down um, or not. So I think that when it comes to small businesses, I hope that a lot of the employers are talking to their employees and staying flexible. I really feel for all the people. Yeah, I would be extremely frustrated
Yeah.
at what's happening right now. And it's just, I feel like this chaos is a little bit deliberate because it keeps people um, complaining to each other and their bosses and everything instead of thinking about what decisions are being made and what priorities that the UK government has and the Treasury.
Now, Anthony, there's this money has been introduced. Do you think this will be enough if it only goes to December? If it only goes to the beginning of December, do you think this will be enough to see people through, and that by the beginning of December we might be looking at a position where the furlough scheme isn't needed in the way that it has been up to now?
Well, we know that there's no certainty, both in terms of when a vaccine might be available and the course of the pandemic in Scotland and the wider UK. So, as what we can control in terms of certainty is what the government response is. So, providing greater financial support and longer time horizons for them is something which we can do and we can control. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I've mentioned Ireland. I always am interested in what's happening in Ireland. And both for the employee wage subsidy scheme and the pandemic unemployment payment, I mean, those have already been committed to through until at least March, I think, if not longer. And that was done months ago to provide certainty for businesses and for workers that they would have those supports to keep people in employment, but also if they lost their job, to receive a level of unemployment payment which would be better than what existed before. And I think that kind of certainty is perfectly possible to achieve, not least considering the record low interest rates at which governments can borrow. And so I think that makes a lot of sense. I would just say, in terms of the fact that the furlough scheme having been reanimated insofar as England requires it, it must be said that the situation in Northern Ireland over the past few weeks it still is extremely serious, perhaps the most serious in any of the nations of the UK, in that there have been on the order of at least 1,000 cases per day. And there was a great reluctance or inability for Northern Ireland to enter a form of lockdown, a form of tighter restrictions, because they didn't have the finance to do so. The UK government at that stage was not willing to provide it. So it was a very clear manifestation how the UK government's approach to finance anti-devolution had very serious implications in terms of health consequences, in terms of the spread of the virus in Northern Ireland. And of course, the consequences for the Republic of Ireland as well, because of and indeed some of the highest incidence rates in the Republic of Ireland are the border counties. So yes, a very serious situation, which is entirely artificial and down to the UK government.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that lack of certainty, and the UK government has developed kind of a habit throughout the pandemic of saying one thing and then at the very last minute changing its mind, and sometimes, generally actually improving things a wee bit at the last minute. But I wonder, what do you make of that just constant chopping and changing on policy that we've seen from particularly the Treasury? Do you think that's a deliberate policy for some reason to keep people on their toes somehow, or is there just chaos in Whitehall just now?
I don't think it's deliberate. I think it's a function of the way in which London works. This is true of coronavirus. It's true of Brexit. It's true of almost anything. The political level, kind of ignores problems until the last minute when they require a solution, and then they look around and see what the political calculation is, and they make a decision. Needless to say, that's not a good way to conduct policy in any circumstances, but particularly not during a pandemic. So just that the UK the UK government has the capacity to provide greater certainty in terms of finance. I think they should do that. I think they should have done that before, but also to take a longer term horizon. And again, that's true for Brexit, but it's also true of the coronavirus. When we think about back to the part of the summer where Boris Johnson was actively encouraging people to return to offices to work, that was not a good decision. It was not a good decision at the time, and it's clearly not a good decision now. You can understand some of the motivations. For instance, businesses such as restaurants and cafes in city centres who are dependent on people going to work and then going to have lunch and so on. You can understand that from an economic perspective. But we have to take a longer term perspective of thinking of having people congregate together in an office setting is a very good way to proliferate a communicable virus. So better long term thinking from the political level in London is essential on coronavirus and indeed on everything. But again, it also, yes, of course, you have to balance the economic needs with the health needs. Yeah, I mean, you can't ignore one or ignore the other. But I think it's always been clear ever since the Conservatives returned to power, and indeed before that, that the economic motivation and the business interest side is something which is very strong for them. And that's understandable. But in this we're in a long-term emergency, public health emergency situation where people need to put aside their political instincts like that and do what is right now. And of course, that's true for every government. It's not just the UK government. I mean, the Irish government, they ignored a suggestion from their public health experts to enter lockdown sooner because they didn't think it was appropriate, and they ended up doing the lockdown anyway, and then doing it for longer because they didn't do it earlier. So many governments all around the world are grappling with these difficult questions. I just don't think the UK government is necessarily, willing to put aside its sort of ideological leanings in the way that they need to.
Now, Kat, I just wanted to turn back to you for a minute before we move on from this. We have seen a lot of this kind of confusion between the UK and England because the UK government, when it comes to public health, only has responsibility for England. We've seen it, though, in some of the announcements. We've seen it in the way that the UK announces figures. It's actually quite difficult to find separated out figures for just England. Excuse me. And then, of course, we've also seen the media kind of referring to this as being a nationwide lockdown, when, of course, it's only one nation that's entering a nationwide lockdown. I wonder, just quickly, what are your thoughts on the way that the UK-England kind of distinction has been blurred during the pandemic, and how you think people, particularly in Scotland, have actually noticed the difference, if you like?
I think a lot of us in Scotland are used to it because it's in the polling numbers. It's part of our lives all the time. To try and figure out, are they talking about all of us or some of us? I think that it's made it more apparent to everyone living in all of the UK about how confusing it can be when you're not the standard, when you're not the default. So I find that I've found it less. I mean, I don't find it any more confusing than most things. But when you study politics and you do statistics, it's all often it's like, why did you aggregate these numbers? Why are these numbers listed separately? So I feel like it's kind of a part of my life all the time. So it's almost like maybe they're getting a taste of their own medicine right now. From not being clearer. And I do think that, this has made the case of why doesn't England have a devolved government? Why doesn't England, because they don't have all of they don't have all the practice into dealing with their regional, and England's regional policy.
Yeah, well, we would obviously support a devolved English government as soon as they decide to start campaigning for one. But we will move on a wee bit now, and we are still, of course, looking at the potential for a no-deal Brexit come the end of December. And Anthony, obviously studying Europe is your whole business. I wonder, first of all, do you feel that there is going to be some sort of deal thrashed out before time runs out?
Yes. On balance, I think it is probable that there will be an agreement. But as we know, this will be a thin agreement. It will be a relatively, at most, it will be a relatively basic free trade agreement, and there may be some additional elements of cooperation on data security, criminal justice, and so on. But none of that is guaranteed. Time is extremely short. And, as we know, this is really up to the UK government, and of course reflects the way in which the UK government has conducted the Brexit process throughout. On the one hand, they say, well, it's important to negotiate tough and to leave things at the last minute. That's what always happens in negotiations and trade negotiations. That may be the case, but Brexit is completely different. This is not about striking a trade deal with an entity that we have no relationship with. This is about ensuring that we don't lose any more than what we've already lost in terms of connectivity with the European Union. So it's vitally crucial to Scotland's prosperity and to the wider UK's prosperity that there is a deal. And for the UK government to rock up and pretend that, it'd be nice to have an agreement if the EU compromises, but we'll be fine without one, is a blatant lie. And it's very frustrating to see a UK government take that approach. But of course, Westminster politics have been completely overtaken by Brexit populism. So it's nothing new. But the cavalier nature in which Boris Johnson is seemingly content with the prospect of a no-deal Brexit is extremely alarming.
And
there's
when
only
you
so much
hear
you can do in
the Westminster government saying things like, we're quite happy with no deal, we're focusing on an Australia-style deal. When you hear those kind of things, do you believe them? Do you think that Boris Johnson and his closer advisors actually would be satisfied with no deal, or do you think that is just bluff?
It's very difficult to say. I think that I believe that politically speaking, I think that Boris Johnson and his government would like to have a deal. In terms of personally speaking, I imagine that they wouldn't really be affected one way or the other because they were well off before, and presumably they'll be well off afterwards. This is about everyone else. This is about the country, of Scotland and the state of the UK in general, and of ordinary people. Those are the people who will be most impacted by no-deal Brexit. People who are already rich will probably still be rich, regardless of what happens. So, I think politically speaking, it looks better to have a deal. So I presume that's what they're going for privately. But, again, from that was I was speaking about earlier about thinking of a longer term horizon. The political calculations of Westminster are always about the next day or the next week. The UK and the EU need a relationship. They need a close relationship, and we will continue to need a close relationship forever, at least for the next few decades. So to sour relations with the EU, as the UK has done throughout the Brexit process, from the very beginning, throughout the withdrawal negotiations, through these current negotiations on the future relationship, that makes it so difficult to have a positive future relationship. And we need that, not just for trade, for everything, for data cooperation, for security cooperation, peace and justice, climate change. The UK will have to work with the EU from the outside forever. And to have approached it in a way which is so insulting and negative towards the EU weakens the UK even more than it's already been weakened by the fact of Brexit itself, the way in which Brexit has been conducted. But Boris Johnson, of course, lived in Brussels. He was a so-called reporter in terms of the accuracy of some of the things he said about the EU at the time. But so he understands how the EU works. Of course, he was foreign secretary as well. So he understands how the EU works. So I presume that means that he knows where the EU is coming from. The EU has always been very consistent. So I can't believe that he doesn't understand the situation. But clearly supporting Brexit is a political project for him, which is convenient and delivered him which he wanted, which is to be prime minister.
And we have been asking everybody that's come on the show about this, but do you think there's going to be a deal? Do you think this is all just smoke and mirrors before Johnson produces something with a flourish and says this is the greatest deal we've ever done, or do you think there is going to be a no deal and that's actually what the UK government is aiming for, as some people have suggested?
Well, I don't think that they have a grand plan. I don't think that he has something in the works that he's going to deliver. I do think they're going to scramble and come up with as many excuses as they can. A lot of blame being placed on the EU, even though the EU, as you said, is very clear about what they're doing. It sounds more like the Scottish government saying these are the facts. We're going to tell you the hard truths and trust that you'll be able to make your decision instead of telling people what they want to hear. I do think that Boris Johnson will say it's the best deal that ever could be possible because that's the way he speaks. But what is his motivation behind it? I don't like you said, Anthony, I don't think he cares that much because he's still going to be fine.
And Kat, as well, we're still presumably going to be dealing with the COVID pandemic once we get to the end of December and the end of the Brexit transition. We may potentially be still under some form of lockdown in some parts of the country at least. I wonder, how much do you think COVID and the pandemic has obscured the Brexit process and could still obscure the actual impact of the end of the transition, of us leaving EU rules and regulations, and basically give the government an out, say, oh no, the reason everything's terrible is COVID. It's got nothing to do with Brexit.
I do think that it's going, instead of there being one big story in the news or one big thing that we're all collectively dealing with, we'll be dealing with two things. But I do think that because of Brexit, the way that the UK government is handling COVID is changed, because I think that they'd be more willing to lock down. I think they'd be more willing to do all these other things if they weren't worried about awarding contracts for Brexit preparations. So what will they blame it on? They'll blame it on whatever is convenient. But I think that instead of one big thing, it'll be two big things, but the pain is still going to be there.
Hmm. And I'd just like to ask both of you as well. We've seen for a long time some kind of quite tetchy language coming from parts of the EU. Some people just say, almost suggesting that Britain should be cut loose, and the EU should stop even really trying to get a deal. What do you think the feeling is generally, Kat, just now across Europe about the UK? Do you think there is still a genuine desire to get a deal, to work together, or do you think that in more and more of European capitals there is a thought of let's just get this over and done with and we don't have to deal with them anymore?
I think perhaps the people in Europe are more worried about the lives of people living in all of the UK than the UK government is. I think that, do they want to deal with this Tory government? No, I think they want to cut them loose and not worry about it anymore. But I think that they are worried about their own citizens living here, as well as just the people living here, knowing that, sometimes you don't want starvations, you don't want deaths, you don't want all this, but do they really deserve to put up with this? I mean, they didn't ask for any of this.
Mm,
So I think it's a lot of weariness and a lot of just dealing with it every day, and just being aggravated.
mm. And Anthony, kind of a similar question to you. How much has
Mhm.
this process, particularly over the last few months, as talks have kind of broken down for a bit, and Johnson threatened not to talk anymore.
Mhm.
How badly do you think that has damaged the UK's reputation in the world, and how do you think that might be rebuilt?
Well, there's no question that Brexit itself, as I've written about quite a lot, is very damaging for the UK's place in the world. I mean, the UK was already in a degree of geopolitical decline with the rise of other powers, and Brexit entirely voluntarily has accelerated that. That's true within Europe, and of course, it's true beyond Europe. I think that EU leaders already had extremely low trust in the Boris Johnson and the UK government, which he ostensibly leads. So that, I mean, the trust was so low, there wasn't much lower to go in that dimension. But I also think that um, I, that they are very pragmatic. The EU is always pragmatic as an organization, and I'm extremely confident that every government in the EU 27 wants a deal, both for themselves, for the European Union, but also for the countries that would be most affected. I mean, there's been much made in this Scottish conversation about the support which the EU 26 have provided to Ireland. That is true, but obviously we could have a fuller debate on the dynamics of that. And we know that Ireland will be extremely impacted by Brexit. Indeed, so much so that the European Union has set up a €5 billion Brexit support fund, of which Ireland is expected to get the lion's share as part of the next 7-year EU budget. So no, they want a deal. And I also, it's quite clear that the Commission, at least, and I imagine most member states, are cognizant of what I mentioned before, which is that the EU needs to have a relationship with the UK going forward. It's not just a question of is there a deal in time for the end of the transition period. It's about, the UK is a large state, larger compared to any other country which is not in the European Union, but close to the European Union. And so there would be an absolute need to work together on problems and issues which arise. And the EU recognize that, and they know that this British problem is not going away. It will just change. It will move into the next phase. The EU is very good at managing challenging situations and managing them concurrently. And the UK will be a problem for the EU to deal with for some time to come.
Well, we move away from Europe now and we drift across the Atlantic to to the US, where the election is due to take place this Tuesday. We understand that at the moment more than 90 million Americans have already cast ballots through early voting and postal voting. That's about 65% of the total turnout in 2016. It's obviously by far the biggest postal voting that anyone can remember in American history. Also, tons and tons of early voting. A lot of people obviously trying to not end up in a long queue on polling day. It does appear, first of all, that Joe Biden is in a significant lead, according to the polls. But of course, we know from 2016 that the polls don't necessarily reflect everything that's going on in American politics. So, Kat, I'll come to you first on this. Obviously, you are a volunteer with Democrats Abroad. You've been working with the Democrats in trying to get the vote out in Scotland. But what are you hearing from your friends, your family in the US just now about the election? Do people feel that Joe Biden is a lock to win it now?
Well, I mean, I know a lot of people that are in my family that are conservative ideologically that have voted for Biden. I've talked to my mom, and people that have never voted Democrat in their life are voting Democrat. I think that to compare the 2016 election and this election is a bit of a red herring because the polls were very volatile, and America, like most of the world, is there's a lot of sexism, and Hillary Clinton was not well liked at all. Joe Biden is a much softer, maybe a figure that people aren't as worried about. Because if you look at who voted for Donald Trump, he did have a lot of suburban white women support in 2016, and that has largely evaporated.
So, what's your feeling about what is going to happen? I mean, we've heard all kinds of horror show predictions about things like this red mirage, where Trump looks like the winner on election day, but once all these postal votes and other votes are counted, Biden will be the actual winner. And now that is that kind of horror show outcome something that you think is likely at this stage, or do you think that the swing to Biden has been so big that it is going to be a pretty convincing win for the Democrats?
I don't think anybody can say that for certain. I know I'm a Florida voter, and they're expecting that when the polls close for Florida to be largely counted, because the elections are controlled state by state in the U.S. So you're going to look at what the East Coast states are voting on. North Carolina and Pennsylvania have had a lot of stuff in the courts, so that's going to be, those states are concerning me, especially since Pennsylvania is such a swing state. And if you look at the states that are on, the deep south, that is on the East Coast, and that's in Eastern time zone. So there probably will be Trump ahead early. And I think that we can expect some chaos, some deliberate chaos, some deliberate trying to close the polls down, people suing on election day to keep polls open or closed, because the election is happening. It's just voting is going to end on Tuesday. Counting is not going to end. You can rest assured that that's going to be in the news cycle, and it's going to be a hubbub. What I'm mostly worried about is violence happening at polling stations. I'm just hoping that any violence is isolated and small. But even yesterday, there was a march for early voting, a peaceful, organized march, and the whole group got pepper sprayed, and a lot of people couldn't vote that day, even though they had all the permits and they have videos of what they were doing. there's a lot of latitude where the police charge them with failure to comply. So there is going to be a lot of stuff in the news. Tuesday is going to be chaos. But it's about trying to see through it, trying to look through that chaos. And do I think that Trump is going to win in the end? No, I don't. I don't. But I think that he's going to try his hardest.
Anthony, I'll come to you now. When you look at this idea of violence, we have obviously seen a number of quite disturbing, there's been a number of disturbing statements from Trump, a number of disturbing actions from some of his supporters. We saw some, for example, picketing William Barr, the Attorney General's house, demanding that he arrest Joe Biden. I wonder, is this idea that there might be some sort of violence either on election day or in the aftermath of the election if Trump should lose? Do you think that's likely, and how do you think the US should be approaching that? How do you think they should be preparing for that?
I don't think it's likely. Generally speaking, we can't predict what will happen in terms of people's responses, nor indeed how Donald Trump in particular will respond if he loses. But no, I don't expect to see any degree of widespread violence because that's not something which I would associate with what would happen in the United States in terms of an election. I know that the circumstances, of course, are different, and Donald Trump has stoked fear and anger and resentment, which can boil over, sure. But I think it's important to remember, as Kat mentioned, that these elections will be taking place on a state-by-state basis. The United States is a true federal system, so you have so many different levels in terms of a federal government, in terms of state government, in terms of county governments, in terms of municipal, so city and town governments. And of course, each municipal government is responsible for running the election in their area. This election is not being run by Democrats or the Republicans, being run by city and town hall officials who have done this before, who have taken extraordinary measures to adapt to the coronavirus. And of course, Americans themselves who have voted early or by mail. I absolutely underline what Kat mentioned, that the election, we have an election day, but the election has been happening for a number of days now. It's just this Tuesday is when the voting will end. So no, I don't, no one can predict what will happen. I think some crucial factors, I suppose, will be if Trump loses, what will the Republican Party do, for instance, if he loses but refuses to concede? If we had the Republican Party itself come out and agree with the result of the election and distance themselves from Trump, that could be interesting. How would congressional Republicans respond within that in terms of Congress people and senators, for instance, if they said, well, we all accept the result of the election? That could make some difference. But no, it's clear that Trump wouldn't go quietly into the night. He's not a conventional president by any imagination. And of course, he will still be president, as I wrote in the report which I published at the end of this month. He will still be president until the 20th of January, in which time he could try to cause disruption and frustration in venting his loss. But I have confidence in the resilience of the checks and balances in the United States and the federal nature of government in the U.S. as well to prevent, things getting very bad.
Well, fingers crossed you're right, Anthony. We will, of course, be reporting on the election come Tuesday and Wednesday. We decided we weren't going to stay up all night on Tuesday for it, but we will be talking about it on Wednesday. I think, Kat, we have you coming back in for that, don't we?
Perhaps I'm not sure.
That may have been an idea that came up in the green room that we haven't actually spoken to you about. So I'm sorry about that. But we will move on just now because we're also now looking at the countdown to COP26, which is due to happen in Glasgow from the 1st to the 12th of November next year. This had been originally due to happen this year. But obviously, there's been a lot of other issues going on in the UK and in the world that have held that up. So, Kat, I think I'll come to you first on this. the Scottish government has had some input into this. Obviously, the UK government has had more. It is an international body between countries, and Scotland, sadly, of course, isn't in that position. But what do you think it means for Scotland to have this major global climate summit coming here? What do you think that can do for Scotland's climate ambitions?
To have COP26 in
Yeah.
Glasgow. I'm really, I guess I'm excited to see because I'm not entirely certain. I think that I don't know why. Like, I think that it's good that it's in Scotland. I think that we have a lot to learn from it, but I'm not exactly sure what specifically we're going to be able to take away, or if there's any influence that we're going to directly have on COP26.
Well, then maybe another question would be, what do you hope might be the outcome of it?
I guess I hope all the world leaders see Scotland and experience it, and realize that we're a different country, and that we are distinct and we have different values. And I hope that by being here and seeing it, I hope that they witness it and that it really resonates, because I think that we have a lot of goodwill in the international community towards Scotland, and I think that it will only increase as time goes on.
And Anthony, this is a major global event coming to Scotland, which is certainly good for Scotland's international profile, as Kat suggests. It is, of course, possible that this could be happening right after a referendum on independence. If Mike Russell's suggestion that September next year is a viable time for an independence referendum, it could be happening right after that. Do you think there is a chance anywhere in there, whether or not that referendum happens, for Scotland to use this to significantly increase its international profile?
Maybe if I just come to very briefly to the question of a referendum, I think it's unlikely that a referendum will be in 2021, not least as after the Holyrood election, we need time to have a campaign and so on. So I think that's unlikely, but putting that to one side. But yes, COP26, it is an important opportunity for Scotland. Of course, there are difficulties in that the UK government is organising it, that there is, not just a passivity, but an active desire in the UK government to marginalise the Scottish government in terms of external relations. That is very clear. That has increased since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. So that's an active challenge for the Scottish government in terms of connecting with and engaging with the countries which will be coming to Glasgow, and of course all the other partners from the international community. Nevertheless, I think there is still an opportunity to showcase what Scotland has to offer the world. And I think the most important way to do that, as it won't surprise you for me to say, given what I've written previously, is to minimize the constitutional debate as much as possible. And obviously, if there were a referendum, that would be difficult. But the best way to build bridges internationally is to focus on things that the rest of the world is interested and cares about. And of course, there's nothing more important than climate change. And there's a great chance to engage in a very practical way with other countries in terms of Scotland's ambitions for climate reduction targets, legislation, renewable energy, research and development, and all of these different things that Scotland can offer, particularly in using the natural resources which Scotland has in a better way in terms of wind, in terms of tidal and wave, and so on. I think there's a lot of space there to work with other countries, but it has to be focused on those particular practical areas where Scotland has something to offer. The world is receptive and willing to listen and work with that, and consider how to really work on a problem which requires all of us to work together. And I think if you just do that, and you sort of highlight but don't engage with the UK government's attempt to marginalise Scotland, then obviously by taking the high ground, that's a better way to showcase what the UK is really like in practice. And then you don't even have to say anything. I think the rest of the world will see that.
Well, Anthony, while you're talking about potentially minimising the constitutional debate during COP26, all under one banner, the organisation that has been running marches across across Scotland in support of independence for several years now is trying to keep the talk of the constitutional debate up. They're looking at organising a second assembly, having held one earlier in the year. They're now looking at holding a second one online, which is due to happen sometime fairly soon. So just quickly, Kat, All Under One Banner obviously have been one of the major grassroots organisations in the campaign, in the independence campaign. I wonder, do you think this having them take a lead on kind of things like policy development and organisation is the right step to take, moving beyond just organising the marches?
I suppose I don't really know who is making these decisions and running it.
Mm.
A big concern of mine, and this does harken back to what Anthony was just saying, is that we've seen support for independence skyrocket over the pandemic, to my mind, anyways, skyrocketing. And the big thing that's happened is that we haven't been out marching, and the desire for independence is there, but it's more that Scotland is competently running itself, and more people are buying in and believing it just by the reality of living in Scotland. And I do think that we must be very careful, those of us who want independence and are already decided. We have to learn that, or we have to realize that sometimes charging ahead is counterproductive. So my concern is, how realistic are the goals that they're setting? How well are they communicating it? And everything like that. I mean, as an American, it's kind of, again, it goes against all of my values that I was brought up with, to say that you shouldn't work towards what you believe. I do think that they absolutely have the right to do it, but I do think that people need to stop and think and examine themselves of, what's your motivation for this, and do you really think it's going to help further independence?
Mm. And Anthony, to come to you on that question, there are a lot of people in the independence movement getting very, very itchy feet. People who want to be campaigning harder, people who want to be kind of getting to independence especially before the Brexit crisis really hits too hard. Do you think there is a role for the grassroots here to maybe nudge the Scottish government to move a little bit faster?
Well, I mean, just to double make sure I clarified. I mean, I do think it's good to have a debate on independence, and we should have that. I'm just saying that when Scotland's trying to engage with countries and international
Of course.
organizations, you focus on what they're interested in. So I
Yeah.
just want to
Yeah,
underline
no,
that.
no, no.
I think
Well,
the debate is
I
really
got that.
important.
I think our viewers did.
Good. Well, because I think a substantive debate on independence is crucial, quite so. But so no, in terms of the role of the grassroots, yeah, I mean, it's extremely important. I mean, you can't have a campaign, you can't have a movement without the grassroots. So no, it's crucial that people are committed to the project and willing to contribute their time and energy. I mean, that's the most valuable thing you can have. I think that for the Scottish government, I know that they're trying to navigate very difficult circumstances. So first of all, there's the pandemic. Secondly, there's Brexit. And thirdly, there is the UK government and its approach to those things and more. It's a challenge to manage all of those things in a way which serves the best interests of the people of Scotland. And I know that that's hard, and that they don't want to get things wrong, and so that means that sometimes they're more cautious than people might want. But at the same time, independent support for independence is at record levels. So something must be going right in that sense. But in terms of how to further the debate, well, it's a challenge with the restrictions that we're living under. But I think it's very clear that we'll have to be sticking to online means, whether it's online events, whether it's social media, and so on, of staying in touch, of working together, of trying to reach out to other people. And that's very difficult. But of course, the pandemic will pass at some point, and then that's the opportunity to be engaging directly with people, whether that be in the street or in marches or on knocking on doors and so on. So that time will come eventually. And I suppose now I definitely think that this is a good moment to be thinking about the issues in detail, about what independence would look like, and indeed I think that's what I try to do quite a lot in my work. But no, so to see other people in that direction as well, I think it's very positive.
Yeah, well, we will obviously keep an eye on what All Under One Banner are up to. We do have some good contacts in the organisation, so I'm sure we will be covering and reporting on that as things develop. But we only have a couple of minutes left, and I did just want to mention the death yesterday of Sean Connery at the age of 90, widely regarded as one of the greatest living Scots. Famously most intelligent people's favourite Bond, and star of many other great films. So, Kat, just I'll come to you first, Kat. What do you make of the death of Sean Connery?
Well, I think that he was ill, and it's sad. Of course, it's sad to hear. I heard a piece that they did on the national news in America on the weekend, the Saturday morning edition, and they spoke about how he was a great supporter of Scottish independence, and I think that he was a great ambassador for Scotland around the world. And I think that, it's a great loss, and it's just, I'll be watching Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade today with my kids.
So, Anthony, what about you? Are you going to be digging out the old Bond movies tonight as well?
Well, I definitely have seen, as Kat mentioned, it's interesting to see how a lot of international media have covered the fact that he was a supporter of independence. I wasn't sure whether or not they would sort of sanitize that. So, for instance, I saw that in Irish media as well. It's a big part of the write-up in the Irish Times and on RTE News. So, clearly he was, one of the most high-profile internationally speaking supporters of Scottish independence. And I think that was, at a time when independence was not a popular view as well. So I think that led to a degree of interest and credibility in other countries and raised the profile of the independence debate. And obviously that campaign will carry forward now without him, now that he's passed.
Yeah, I mean, of course, he will be very greatly missed. He hadn't been acting for a while, but thankfully we do still have all his movies left to remember him by. And as Anthony said, a huge supporter of the independence movement for many years, even when it wasn't a popular option. So I'm sure there are many within the movement who would thank him for that. But that is just about all we have time for today. So I would like to thank Anthony Salamone and Kat Carey very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to both of you. And we'd like to thank you at home for joining us as well. There would be no point in making the shows if it wasn't for you. So thank you very much for being with us today. We do have to ask, if you're able to support Broadcasting Scotland, that you do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month is what makes it possible for us to keep making shows here at Broadcasting Scotland. So if you can support us financially, then please do. If you can't, we do understand, and we're not going to be mad at you about it. You're always still welcome to join us here. The shows will always be free to view online. But you can still make a big difference for us by following us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, by liking our Facebook page, by subscribing to our YouTube channel, and then sharing the shows around with people. We don't have a lot of money here for advertising. So everything that you can do to spread the word is a great thing for us. That's how we are going to build our audience. So do please help us out there if you can. And finally, we have talked about the election next year, potentially an independence referendum coming relatively soon as well. It's going to take a lot more bodies for us to cover those things properly. So wherever you are in the country, if you're interested in getting involved in improving broadcasting in Scotland, then do please get in touch with us. We are going to need journalists all over the country. There are writing jobs that can always be done from all over the country. We might need a couple of people here in Glasgow that want to get in and work in the studio, particularly in front of the camera like this. But we want to hear from people everywhere. So if you're interested at all in getting involved in the future of broadcasting for Scotland, do please give us a shout. But that is absolutely all we have time for. So once again, thank you so much to Kat Carey and to Anthony Salamone for joining us. Thank you for joining us as well. Gordon will be back tomorrow at 7 with Scotland at 7. I'll be back on Tuesday. But until then, have a great Sunday. Goodbye.